We're going to explore the world of the American mountain men between 1800 and 1850, when roughly 20,000 brave souls ventured into the uncharted wilderness armed with nothing but an axe, a rifle, and an unbreakable will to survive. These weren't weekend campers or adventure tourists. These were men who spent years at a time in complete isolation, transforming the raw materials of the forest into shelters that would protect them through winters that could kill an unprepared soul in a single night. They developed skills that modern society has almost completely forgotten, creating homes from standing timber using techniques passed down through generations of woodsmen and learned from indigenous peoples who had mastered these lands for centuries. Tonight, you'll experience what it was truly like to face the approaching winter with nothing but the clothes on your back and the knowledge in your head. You'll feel the weight of the axe in your blistered hands, smell the fresh-cut pine, and understand the profound satisfaction that comes from creating shelter through pure human determination. So breathe deeply, let your muscles relax completely, and prepare to journey back to a time when every sunrise was a gift and every shelter built was a victory against the indifferent forces of nature. The wind is picking up outside, and there's snow in the air. Time is running out, and you have a cabin to build. Segment 1. The first light of desperation. Your eyes flutter open to absolute darkness. Not the comfortable darkness of your bedroom with streetlights bleeding through curtains, but the complete, consuming blackness of the wilderness before dawn. It's October 15th, 1834, somewhere in what will one day become Montana territory. Right now, it's just endless mountains and forest, where the only law is survival, and the only shelter is what you can create with your own hands. The ground beneath you is frozen earth, hard as stone and covered with a thin layer of frost that crunches when you shift your weight. Your wool blanket is stiff with ice crystals, and when you breathe out, the vapor hangs in the still air like a ghost before slowly dispersing. Every joint in your body aches from sleeping on the unforgiving ground, cushioned only by a bed of pine boughs that you gathered before dark. You've been in these mountains for 3 months now, ever since you left Fort Union with a pack full of dreams and a head full of romantic notions about the mountain man's life. Those notions died hard deaths over the past 90 days. Reality out here isn't the adventure stories told in St. Louis taverns. It's cold that burns your lungs, hunger that gnaws at your belly like a living thing, and the constant knowledge that you're always just one mistake away from becoming another nameless casualty of the frontier. The fire you built last night has died down to barely glowing embers, scattered among white ash that looks like tiny bones in the darkness. Your hands, already raw with fresh blisters from weeks of hard living, sting as you push yourself up to sitting. The movement sends shooting pains through your back and shoulders, muscles that have been pushed beyond their limits day after day. But today is different. Today, the approaching storm that's been building for the past week can no longer be ignored. The wind carries a sharp, metallic scent that experienced mountain men know means heavy snow is coming. The kind of storm that buries the landscape under feet of white death. The kind that has killed more trappers than hostile tribes and grizzly bears combined. You reach for your possibles bag, that leather pouch containing everything you need to start a fire and stay alive another day. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth to keep it dry, are your flint and steel, a handful of char cloth made from an old shirt, and some shredded cedar bark that you've been carefully collecting and keeping dry inside your shirt. Fire isn't just comfort out here. Fire is life itself. Working by feel in the darkness, you arrange a small nest of tinder over the dying embers. Your fingers are so numb you can barely feel what you're doing, but you've done this hundreds of times now. The ritual of fire making has become as natural as breathing. You blow gently on the embers, rhythmically, patiently, coaxing them back to life. A tiny spark catches in the cedar bark, glowing orange for a moment before growing into a small flame. Gradually, carefully, you feed the newborn fire with pencil-thin twigs, then slightly larger ones, building it up until you have enough heat to warm your hands and boil water for coffee. The bitter liquid, made from grounds you've already used 3 times, tastes like mud. But it's hot, and it contains enough precious caffeine to help you face what's coming as the first gray light of dawn begins to filter through the towering pines that surround your small clearing. You can see your breath hanging in clouds around your face. The temperature must be well below freezing, and it's only going to get colder. Much colder. The storm approaching from the northwest carries the promise of winter's full fury. And you know with absolute certainty that your current shelter, nothing more than a lean-to made of pine boughs, will not protect you through what's coming. You have perhaps 12 hours of daylight. Maybe less, given the thick clouds building overhead. 12 hours to transform the standing timber around you into walls that will break the wind, a roof that will shed snow, and a fireplace that will provide the heat necessary to survive the next 6 months. 12 hours to build something that will keep you alive, or accept that you'll likely be dead before the week is out. The clearing you chose 3 days ago seems perfect in the growing light. It sits on a gentle south-facing slope that will catch every precious minute of winter sunlight. A spring bubbles up from the rocks about 50 yards away, flowing clear and cold, the kind of water source that won't freeze even in the deepest winter. To the north, a thick stand of mature pines provides a natural windbreak against the bitter winds that pour down from the high peaks. But most importantly, you're surrounded by the raw materials you need. Lodgepole pines stretch in every direction, their straight trunks reaching toward the sky like the columns of some natural cathedral. These trees, some over 100 feet tall and 3 feet thick at the base, will provide everything you need to build your fortress against winter. The trick is knowing which ones to cut, how to work them, and how to fit them together into something that will stand against months of howling wind and crushing snow. You stretch your aching back and walk to where your axe is buried blade deep in a stump. This tool, forged in St. Louis and carried over 1,000 miles of prairie and mountain, it's worth more than its weight in gold out here. The handle is worn smooth by countless hours of use, stained dark with sweat and blood from your hands. The head is still sharp, thanks to careful maintenance with your whetstone every evening. But you know that what you're about to attempt will test both the tool and the man wielding it. Mountain men had a saying, dawn to dusk. Swing that axe, or come spring, there's a bear on your grave. It wasn't poetry, but it captured the reality of life in the wilderness. Every daylight hour was precious. Every moment of good weather, a gift that couldn't be wasted. As you pull the axe free from the stump, you can feel the weight of it in your hands, the perfect balance that comes from a well-made tool. The steel head catches the early light, reflecting it back like a promise. Today, this axe will either save your life or you'll die trying to use it. There's no middle ground in the mountains. The first tree you've marked for cutting stands, about 40 yards from your chosen cabin site. It's a beautiful lodgepole pine, straight as an arrow, and about 14 inches in diameter at the base. The bark is thick and rough under your hands, and when you press your ear against it, you can almost hear the life flowing through the wood. In a few minutes, that life will end, transformed into the raw material of your survival. You take a deep breath of the sharp morning air, feeling it burn your lungs with its purity and cold. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk circles on invisible thermals, probably wondering what this strange two-legged creature is doing in its domain. The only sounds are your own breathing, the whisper of wind through pine needles, and the distant murmur of the spring that will provide your water through the winter months. Then you swing the axe for the first time, feeling the blade bite deep into the bark and heartwood. Chips of fresh pine fly through the air, releasing the clean, resinous scent that will become as familiar as your own breath in the months ahead. The impact sends vibrations up through the handle and into your already sore arms. But you welcome the pain. It means you're doing something, fighting back against the wilderness that seems determined to kill you. Again and again you swing. Each stroke deliberate and calculated. You're not just chopping randomly. You're creating a precise notch on the side of the tree facing the direction you want it to fall. The technique was learned from French-Canadian voyageurs and perfected by generations of American woodsmen. Too shallow, and the tree might not fall at all. Too deep, and it could split unpredictably, possibly falling back on you with enough force to crush every bone in your body. The rhythmic sound of axe biting would echoes through the forest, a percussion that speaks of human determination in the face of natural indifference. Your muscles warm with the work, and despite the cold air, sweat begins to form on your forehead and under your arms. The physical labor feels good after months of the smaller tasks of trapping and survival. This is work with a purpose, building something that will last as the notch deepens. You begin to hear the subtle changes in the sound your axe makes. The solid thunk of blade hitting healthy wood gradually develops. Overtones that tell you you're approaching the tree's heart. Mountain men learn to read these sounds like a written language, understanding exactly how much wood remained and when. To move to the backside of the tree to make the felling cut, when the front notch is nearly a third of the way through the trunk. You move to the opposite side and begin cutting slightly higher than your first cut. This back cut will create the hinge of wood that will control how the tree falls, guiding it exactly where you want it to go. Get this wrong, and 100 feet of pine weighing thousands of pounds could crush you in an instant. The forest seems to hold its breath as you make the final cuts. Even the wind dies down, as if nature itself is waiting to see whether you'll succeed or become another victim of your own ambition. Then you hear it, that unmistakable crack that means the tree is beginning to give way. The sound starts as a whisper, barely audible, then grows to a groan. Then a roar as gravity takes hold. You step back quickly, eyes locked on the top of the pine as it begins its majestic fall. For a moment, it seems to hang suspended, defying gravity, then it surrenders to physics and crashes toward the earth. The impact when it hits is tremendous, shaking the ground beneath your feet and sending a cloud of snow and debris flying through the air. Birds explode from nearby trees, their cries of alarm echoing across the clearing. One down. You'll need at least 20 more before the day is done. Your arms are already beginning to ache from the effort, and you can feel new blisters forming on your palms despite the thick calluses you've developed over the past months. But there's no time to rest, no time to nurse minor injuries. The storm clouds overhead are getting darker, and you can feel the pressure dropping in a way that experienced outdoorsmen learn to recognize. Weather is coming, and it won't wait for you to be ready. The next tree falls easier, your technique improving with practice. Then the next, and the next. By mid-morning, you have 5 large pines down, their trunks lying parallel across your clearing like giant pickup sticks. Now comes the even more laborious process of limbing them. Removing every branch to leave clean, workable logs. Working alone. Every task takes 3 or 4 times longer than it would with help. Each branch must be cut carefully to avoid binding your axe in the wood. Larger limbs require multiple cuts, working from the bottom up to prevent the weight from splitting the bark and potentially ruining the log. Your shoulders burn with fatigue, and your hands are beginning to bleed through your gloves. But you keep working. The sun climbs higher in the sky, providing a little warmth. But the wind is picking up, and the first scattered snowflakes are beginning to fall. Not the gentle snow of early autumn, but the hard, driving flakes that mean serious weather is moving in. You pause long enough to chew a piece of jerky and drink some water from your canteen. The liquid already beginning to form ice crystals around the edges. Looking at your progress so far, you estimate you have maybe 6 hours of good working light left. 6 hours to fell the remaining trees you'll need, finish limbing everything, and begin the actual construction. It seems impossible, but impossible is a luxury you can't afford. Out here, you do what needs to be done or you die trying. The afternoon passes in a blur of swinging steel and flying wood chips. Tree after tree falls to your axe, each one a small victory against the approaching storm. Your technique continues to improve, and you find a rhythm that conserves energy while maintaining steady progress. Swing, step, swing, step, reading the wood. Feeling the tree's balance, guiding each giant to fall exactly where you need it. By late afternoon, as the light begins to fail and the snow starts falling in earnest, you have 18 logs down and limbed. Not as many as you'd hoped for, but perhaps enough to get started. Your hands are a bloody mess inside your gloves, and your arms shake with exhaustion. But you've laid the foundation for what will either be your salvation or your tomb. The temperature is dropping rapidly now, and the wind is beginning to howl through the trees with a sound like voices crying in the wilderness. Time to build a fire, eat something hot, and plan for tomorrow's work. Because tomorrow you begin the real challenge, turning these fallen trees into walls that will stand against winter's fury as you gather wood for your fire. The snow falls heavier, beginning to accumulate on the logs you've worked so hard to fell. The wilderness is already trying to reclaim your work, to bury it under white silence. But you're not giving up. You've come too far and invested too much sweat and blood to surrender now. The fire catches quickly. Fed by the abundant, resin-rich pine branches you've trimmed from your logs, the flames leap high, casting dancing shadows on the snow-covered ground and the scattered timber that will soon become your fortress. You sit close to the heat, feeling it penetrate your cold-stiffened muscles while you gnaw on jerky and plan the next day's work. In the distance, a wolf howls, its voice carrying across a valley like a reminder that you're not alone in this wilderness. Other creatures are preparing for winter too, building their dens, gathering their stores, following instincts honed by thousands of years of survival. You're just doing the same thing, using the intelligence and opposable thumbs that evolution gave you to create shelter from the raw materials at hand, as you spread your blanket near the fire and prepare for another night on the hard ground. You look up at the falling snow and make a silent promise to yourself. Tomorrow, you start building walls. Tomorrow, you begin creating something that will keep you alive through the long winter ahead. Tomorrow, you prove that human determination can triumph over nature's indifference. The fire crackles and pops, sending sparks spiraling up into the dark sky. Around you, 18 fallen trees lie waiting to be transformed into something greater than the sum of their parts. The storm is coming. Winter is approaching. But tonight, you rest with the knowledge that you've taken the first crucial steps toward survival. Sleep comes quickly, your body exhausted by the day's labor. But even in sleep, your mind continues to work, planning and calculating, preparing for the challenges ahead. Because in the wilderness, even your dreams must be practical if you want to see another spring. Segment 2, The Architecture of Survival Dawn, breaks gray and cold over your clearing. The fallen logs now dusted with a light coating of snow that fell during the night. Your fire has burned down to coals, but the heat it provided kept you from freezing solid during the darkest hours. Every muscle in your body screams in protest as you sit up, your hands so stiff you can barely work your fingers into your gloves. The temperature has dropped significantly overnight. When you breathe out, your breath hangs in the air like fog, and the water in your canteen has a thin skin of ice across the top. This is nature's warning that winter is no longer approaching, it's arriving. Whether you're ready or not, you build up the fire with practiced efficiency, blowing life back into the coals and feeding them twigs until you have enough flame to provide warmth and boil water for coffee. The bitter brew, made from grounds you've now used 4 times, barely qualifies as coffee anymore, but it's hot and contains enough caffeine to help you face Another day of back-breaking labor. While you sip the scalding liquid, you study the logs scattered around your clearing with the eye of a builder rather than a woodsman. Yesterday, you were focused on simply getting trees down. Today, you need to start thinking like an architect, planning how these rough timbers will fit together to create walls that will stand against months of wind. And whether the first step is selecting which logs will become your foundation. The sill logs that will rest directly on the ground and support everything built above them. These need to be your straightest, strongest timbers, free from rot or major defects. You walk among the fallen trees, rolling them slightly with your shoulder to examine their entire length, looking for the subtle signs of quality that mean the difference between a wall that stands and one that fails. Mountain men didn't have the luxury of kiln-dried, perfectly straight lumber from a sawmill. They worked with what the forest provided, learning to see the potential in rough, irregularly shaped logs. The trick was understanding which imperfections you could work around, and which would doom your structure before it was even complete. You select 4 logs for your foundation, each about 12 inches in diameter and as straight as nature ever makes them. These will form the rectangular base of your cabin, approximately 10 feet by 12 feet. Any larger, and you'd have trouble heating the space efficiently. Any smaller, and you wouldn't have room for the supplies and equipment necessary to survive a mountain winter. The next challenge is preparing the site. You clear away the snow and scrape down to bare earth. Then use your axe to roughly level the ground where your foundation will sit. The soil is already frozen hard, making this work difficult, but a level foundation is crucial. Get this wrong, and every subsequent course of logs will be out of square, creating gaps that will let in wind and cold as you work. You're struck by how different this is from simply camping in the wilderness. For months, you've lived day to day, concerned only with finding your next meal and staying warm through the current night. Now you're thinking months ahead, planning for challenges you haven't yet faced. It's a mental shift as significant as the physical work itself. The foundation logs need to be notched where they join at the corners. This isn't simply a matter of cutting grooves. These joints must be precisely fitted to create a stable, square base that will support thousands of pounds of timber above. You begin with what mountain men called the saddle notch, cutting a curved depression near the end of each log that will cradle the crossing timber. Working with just an axe, this precision cutting requires skill that can only come from experience. You make a series of parallel cuts about 4 inches apart, then chop out the wood between them to form a rough trough. The work is slow and demanding, requiring constant attention to keep the cuts straight and even. One mistake could ruin a log you spent hours preparing. The sound of axe striking wood echoes across the clearing in a steady rhythm, occasionally punctuated by the crack of wood splitting or the thud of debris hitting the ground. Your hands, already damaged from yesterday's work, begin bleeding again through your gloves. The pain is constant now, but you've learned to ignore it. Out here, pain is just information, useful data about the state of your body, but not something that stops you from working. By mid-morning, you have your first corner joint cut and fitted. The satisfaction of seeing 2 logs locked together perfectly, forming a solid right angle, is profound. This is the beginning of your walls, the foundation upon which everything else will be built. You test the joint by putting your full weight on it, feeling the logs settle together with a solid feeling of quality construction. The work continues methodically. Each notch takes 30 to 40 minutes to cut properly, and you need 8 of them just for the foundation. Your progress seems painfully slow, but you force yourself to focus on quality rather than speed. A poorly cut joint now could lead to structural failure later, when repair would be impossible in deep snow and bitter cold. The snow continues to fall intermittently, sometimes just a few scattered flakes. Other times coming down heavily enough to dust your work before melting from the heat of your exertion. The temperature remains well below freezing. And the wind has a bite to it that cuts through your buckskins like they were made of paper. Around noon, you pause to eat a meager lunch of jerky and the last of your parched corn. Sitting on one of your foundation logs, you study the terrain around your cabin site with new appreciation. The south-facing slope will catch every possible minute of winter sunlight. The nearby spring provides water that won't freeze. The thick pines to the north will break the worst of the winter winds. But you also notice things that worry you. The depth of snow that's already accumulating, even from this relatively light fall. The way the wind swirls around certain areas, creating drifts that could potentially bury your door. The distance to the nearest significant timber if you run out of firewood before spring. Every detail matters when your life depends on the choices you make. After lunch, you return to the painstaking work of cutting joints. Your technique improves with practice, and you develop a rhythm that conserves energy while maintaining precision. The foundation slowly takes shape, 4 logs forming a perfect rectangle on the leveled ground. When you step back to survey your work, you feel a surge of pride mixed with determination. This is real progress, something solid and permanent in the wilderness. The afternoon brings new challenges as you begin laying the second course of logs. These need to be notched not only at the corners, but also fitted to the uneven surfaces of the logs below them. Each timber is unique, with its own curves and irregularities that must be accommodated. You spend long minutes studying each log, planning how it will fit, where the notches need to be cut. This is where the real skill of cabin building shows itself. Anyone can cut down trees and chop off the branches, but creating walls that fit together tightly, that shed water and keep out wind, requires an understanding of wood that goes beyond simple carpentry. You need to read the grain, understand how the timber will move as it dries, anticipate where gaps will develop and plan to fill them as the second course goes up. Your cabin begins to look like something more than just logs lying on the ground. The walls are only 2 logs high, barely reaching your knees, but they define a space, an area that will soon be inside rather than outside, sheltered rather than exposed. The psychological impact of this transformation is stronger than you expected. The work is becoming more difficult as the walls rise. Lifting and positioning logs that weigh several hundred pounds each requires techniques you're still learning. You fashion crude ramps from smaller logs, allowing you to roll the larger timbers up to the height where they need to be placed. It's exhausting work, made more dangerous by hands slick with blood and sweat despite the cold by late afternoon. You have 3 complete courses of logs in place. The walls now reach to your waist, beginning to look like the foundation of a real structure. But you're also acutely aware of how much work remains. You need at least 5 more courses, 4 walls of adequate height, plus the complex framing required for doors, windows, and a fireplace. The light is beginning to fail, and the temperature is dropping rapidly as the sun disappears behind the western peaks. Snow is falling more steadily now, accumulating on your logs and making the work increasingly difficult. Your hands are so numb you can barely feel the axe handle, and your arms shake with exhaustion from the day's labor. Time to stop for the day. Build up your fire and plan tomorrow's work. You gather armloads of pine branches from your limbing work, creating a fire that will burn hot and bright through the night. The flames reflect off the snow-covered logs of your emerging cabin, creating patterns of light and shadow that make your modest progress look almost magical as you prepare a simple dinner of jerky and snow melted for water. You can't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. 2 days ago, this was just standing timber. Now you have the beginnings of walls, the foundation of a structure that might actually keep you alive through the winter. It's crude and rough, but it's real progress in the face of seemingly impossible odds. The wind picks up as darkness falls, howling through the trees with a sound that reminds you of all the men who've tried this before you and failed. Their bones are scattered throughout these mountains, victims of cold, hunger, accidents, or simple miscalculation. You're determined not to join them. Wrapped in your blanket beside the fire, you study the partial walls of your cabin in the flickering light. Tomorrow, you'll continue building upward, log by log, joint by joint. The work will be harder as the walls get higher, the lifting more difficult, the fitting more precise. But you're learning with each cut, each joint, each small victory against the wilderness. Sleep comes despite the cold and the discomfort of sleeping on the frozen ground. Your body has adapted to hardships that would have seemed impossible just months ago. As you drift off, the snow falls heavier, covering your work with a white blanket that will be gone by morning. But the logs beneath remain solid and real. The beginning of your fortress against winter, in your dreams. You see the cabin completed walls rising to full height. A roof overhead, a fireplace providing warmth against the bitter cold. The dream seems both impossible and inevitable. A future that exists only if you have the strength and skill to make it real. Tomorrow brings another day of swinging the axe, another chance to turn vision into reality. One carefully fitted log at a time. Segment 3. Blood, sweat, and timber. The third morning dawns clearer but colder, with a thin layer of ice covering everything in the clearing. Your breath creates clouds that hang in the still air like visible reminders of how close you are to the edge of survival. The fire has burned down to barely glowing coals, and when you stir them back to life, the flame seems smaller, more fragile against the vastness of the wilderness surrounding you. Your hands have moved beyond simple pain into a constant throb that you've learned to work through. When you pull off your gloves to examine them in the firelight, you see palms cross-hatched with cuts and blisters that have broken and reformed and broken again. The skin is tough as leather now, but the price has been written in blood on every piece of wood you've touched. Today, the real challenge begins. The foundation and first few courses of logs were relatively straightforward, heavy work, but following principles any reasonably intelligent person could master. Now you need to start thinking about the complex joinery required for door and window openings, the precise measurements needed for a fireplace that won't fill your cabin with smoke, and the engineering required to support a roof that must bear tons of snow. As you sip your morning coffee, grounds now used so many times they barely color the water brown. You study the cabin plans you've scratched into the dirt beside your fire, 10 feet by 12 feet, with the door on the south wall to catch maximum sunlight, a single window on the east wall, and a fireplace dominating the north wall. Simple in concept, but each of these features requires skills you're still learning through trial and error. The morning's first task is continuing to build the walls higher. You need at least 7 full courses of logs to create walls tall enough for a man to stand comfortably inside, with 3 courses already in place. That means 4 more rounds of the exhausting process of selecting, lifting, notching, and fitting logs that seem to get heavier with each course you add. You select your next log carefully, rolling it into position at the base of your makeshift ramp. This one is slightly larger than ideal, probably 14 inches in diameter, but it's straight and free from defects. Working alone, you have no choice but to use whatever timber the forest provides. Adapting your techniques to work with imperfect materials. The process of rolling a several hundred-pound log up a ramp and into position requires a combination of brute strength, careful planning, and not a little luck. You position your shoulder against the log and push, using your legs to drive upward while trying to keep the timber from rolling sideways off the ramp. Halfway up, the log shifts unexpectedly, nearly crushing your foot before you can leap aside. Your heart pounds as you realize how close you came to serious injury. A broken foot out here would be a death sentence. No way to hunt, gather firewood, or maintain your shelter. The wilderness doesn't forgive carelessness, and working alone means there's no one to help if something goes wrong. You take a moment to catch your breath and remind yourself that patience and care are more important than speed. The second attempt goes better. You use a length of rope to help control the log's movement, looping it around the timber and using it to prevent unwanted rolling. The technique works, and you successfully maneuver the log into position on top of the existing wall. Small victories like this feel monumental when your life depends on getting every detail right. Notching the ends of this log to fit the crossing timbers below requires even more precision than before. The logs beneath are settling and drying, changing shape slightly as their moisture content decreases. What fit perfectly yesterday might not fit today, requiring adjustments and modifications that test both your skill and your patience. You work slowly and methodically, making small cuts and constantly checking the fit. The wood is becoming harder as the cold increases, making each axe stroke more jarring to your already aching arms. But the joints must be precise. Gaps between logs will let in wind and cold, potentially making the cabin uninhabitable no matter how well built the rest of the structure might be. By mid-morning, you've successfully added one more log to each wall, bringing your cabin up to 4 courses high. The structure is beginning to look substantial now, the walls reaching nearly to your chest. But you're also becoming acutely aware of how much harder the work becomes with each additional course. Lifting logs to shoulder height will require techniques you haven't yet mastered. The snow continues to fall intermittently, sometimes just a few flakes drifting down through the pines. Other times coming in bursts heavy enough to dust your work before melting from your body heat. The temperature remains well below freezing, and you can feel the moisture in your breath beginning to freeze in your beard, creating small icicles that tinkle when you move your head. Around noon, disaster nearly strikes. You're wrestling a particularly stubborn log into position when your footing slips on the icy ground. The timber, weighing close to 400 pounds, begins to roll toward you. For a terrifying moment, you're trapped between the falling log and the wall behind you. With nowhere to go and no time to escape, instinct takes over. You throw yourself sideways, feeling the log brush against your ribs as it crashes to the ground where you'd been standing just a second before. The impact shakes the earth and sends a jolt of adrenaline through your system that leaves you trembling. Another few inches and you would have been crushed. Your bones shattered beyond any hope of survival. You sit in the snow for several minutes, waiting for your heart rate to return to normal and your hands to stop shaking. This is exactly the kind of accident that kills men working alone in the wilderness. No amount of skill or experience can completely eliminate the danger when you're moving objects that way more than most horses. But there's no choice except to continue. The alternative to building this cabin is certain death when the full force of winter arrives. You get back to your feet, check yourself for injuries, and begin the process of getting the wayward log back into position. This time, you're even more careful, using additional ropes and taking time to clear all the ice from your footing. The afternoon brings new challenges as you work on the 5th course of logs. At this height, you can no longer simply roll timbers up a ramp. You need to devise a system of levers and pulleys using nothing more than rope and smaller logs as fulcrums. The ancient principles of mechanical advantage become your allies in the battle against gravity and your own physical limitations. You remember stories told by older trappers about building techniques learned from French voyageurs and native tribes who had been constructing log buildings for generations. Before the first Americans set foot in these mountains, men who could raise massive timbers with nothing but cleverly applied leverage and an understanding of physics that came from necessity rather than formal education. Your improvised lifting system works, but barely. Each log now takes the better part of an hour to position properly, and the physical effort required leaves you exhausted and shaking. Your clothes are soaked with sweat despite the freezing air and the contrast between your overheated body and the cold. Wind creates a misery that seems to penetrate to your bones, but the walls continue to rise. 5 courses now, then the beginning of the 6th. The cabin is starting to look like a real structure, something that could actually provide shelter for a human being. The psychological impact of this transformation helps you push through the physical exhaustion and constant pain in your hands and arms. As the light begins to fail and the temperature drops toward what will undoubtedly be the coldest night yet, you realize you've reached a crucial decision point. The walls are now high enough to provide some protection from wind, but still far from complete. Do you risk another night sleeping outside? Or do you move into the unfinished cabin and continue building from the inside? The decision is made for you when the wind picks up, driving snow horizontally across the clearing with enough force to sting your face and hands. The partial walls of your cabin block most of this wind, creating a pocket of relatively calm air inside the structure. For the first time in days, you're not being constantly buffeted by the elements. You build your fire inside the cabin walls, using the stone ring you prepared for your future fireplace. Without a proper chimney, smoke fills the upper portion of the space, but it's still more comfortable than being completely exposed. The walls reflect the fire's heat back toward you, concentrating the warmth in a way that makes you realize just how much energy you've been losing to the open air as you prepare your evening meal. Another portion of increasingly tough jerky and snow melted for water, you study the walls surrounding you by firelight. They're rough, with gaps between the logs that will need to be chinked with moss and clay. The joints are crude compared to what a professional carpenter might produce, but they're solid, fitted well enough to provide real protection from the elements. The night is indeed the coldest yet. Even inside your partial walls, the temperature drops far enough that water freezes solid in your canteen. But the difference is remarkable compared to previous nights spent completely in the open. The walls break the wind and reflect heat from your fire, creating a microclimate that's perhaps 20 degrees warmer than the surrounding forest. You sleep fitfully, waking several times to add wood to the fire and check that nothing has shifted or settled in ways that might compromise your work. Each time you wake, you're reminded of how far you've come in just a few days. The transition from sleeping completely exposed to having even these partial walls around you feels like the difference between wilderness and civilization. Morning comes with clear skies, but temperatures so cold that your breath instantly freezes into ice crystals that fall to the ground like tiny bells. The fire has burned down to coals again, but the walls have retained enough heat that your blanket isn't stiff with frost for the first time in weeks. Today, you need to continue building upward, while also beginning to plan for the roof structure. The walls need to be at least 1 course higher before you can start thinking about the complex joinery required to support rafters and ridge beams. But you're also running low on prepared logs, which means more trees need to be felled and processed. The work continues with the same methodical precision that's characterized every aspect of this project. Each log must be selected, positioned, notched, and fitted with care that borders on obsession. Every mistake costs time and materials you can't afford to waste. Every successful joint brings you one step closer to a shelter that might actually keep you alive through the months ahead. As you swing your axe to begin another day of building, you can't help but reflect on how this work is changing you. The man who started this project just days ago was already hardened by months in the wilderness. But the constant physical demands and precise mental focus required for cabin building are forging something new. Every successful cut, every well-fitted joint, every course of logs successfully raised is building confidence along with walls. The cabin is becoming more than just shelter. It's becoming proof that human determination and skill can triumph over seemingly impossible odds. Each log represents a small victory against the indifferent forces of nature that seem determined to kill you. Together, they're creating something that will stand as a testament to what one Person can accomplish when failure simply isn't an option. The morning's work begins with the familiar ritual of fire building and the bitter coffee that's become your only luxury. But today feels different somehow. The walls around you have reached a height where they genuinely feel like protection, rather than just a gesture against the wilderness. Today, you're not just building a cabin, you're building a home. Segment 4. The architecture of warmth. The morning of the fourth day brings a silence so complete it seems to press against your eardrums. No wind stirs the pines, no birds call from the branches, and even the nearby spring seems muted under its coating of ice. This is the silence that comes with truly bitter cold. When the air itself seems too frozen to carry sound properly, when you step outside your partial walls to relieve yourself, the cold hits you like a physical blow. Your breath doesn't just create clouds, it crystallizes instantly, forming ice particles that fall to the ground with tiny, tinkling sounds. The coffee in your cup, hot just moments ago, develops a skin of ice before you can finish drinking it. Today marks a crucial transition in your building project. The walls have reached sufficient height to provide real shelter, but now you face challenges that require not just strength and endurance, but genuine carpentry skills. Creating the openings for your door and window, building a fireplace that will draw properly, and preparing for the roof structure all demand precision that goes far beyond simply stacking logs. You begin the day by taking careful measurements for your door opening. This will be cut into the south wall, positioned to catch maximum sunlight during the brief winter days ahead. The opening needs to be just the right size, large enough for a man to pass through easily while carrying firewood or game, but not so large that it weakens the wall structure or allows excessive heat loss. Using a piece of charcoal from your fire, you mark the outline directly on the logs. The door will be approximately 3 feet wide and 6 feet high, requiring you to cut completely through 3 of your carefully fitted logs. The thought of destroying work you've invested so much effort in seems almost sacrilegious. But the cabin is useless without a proper entrance. The technique for cutting the opening requires skills you've never attempted before. Simply chopping through the logs with your axe would create ragged edges that could never be properly sealed. Instead, you need to make precise cuts that will allow you to frame the opening with additional timbers, creating a doorway that's both strong and weatherproof. You start by drilling holes along your marked lines using the point of your knife, slowly working through the tough pine wood. The process is tedious and hard on your already damaged hands, but it creates guide holes that help you make accurate cuts with your axe. Each cut must be perfectly straight and exactly perpendicular to the wall surface. The work progresses slowly, requiring constant attention to detail. One mistake could ruin logs you've spent days preparing and fitting. Your hands are so stiff from the cold that you have trouble maintaining your grip on the tools, and several times you're forced to stop and warm them by the fire before continuing by mid-morning. You've managed to cut through the bottom log of your door opening. The satisfaction of seeing a clean, straight cut through the timber is enormous. But you're also sobered by how long the process took. At this rate, completing the doorway will consume most of the day, leaving no time for other essential work. But there's no choice except to continue. A cabin without a proper door is barely more useful than a lean-to, and winter won't wait for you to figure out faster techniques. You press on, making cut after careful cut, gradually working your way up through the logs that form your future. Doorway, the second log, proves even more challenging than the first. A large knot near the center of the opening requires delicate work to remove without splitting the timber. You probe carefully with your knife point, following the grain lines and gradually loosening the knot until it can be removed in one piece. The resulting hole will need to be plugged with a carefully fitted piece of wood, but at least the log remains intact. Around noon, you take a brief break to assess your progress and eat a meager lunch. The door opening is roughly half complete, with clean cuts through 2 of the 3 logs that need to be modified. The work is going more slowly than you'd hoped, but the quality of the cuts gives you confidence that the finished doorway will be both strong and weatherproof. As you eat your lunch, another portion of jerky that's becoming increasingly tough and unpalatable, you study the area where your fireplace will need to be built. This represents perhaps the most critical aspect of the entire cabin. A poorly designed fireplace could fill your shelter with smoke, making it uninhabitable. Worse, it could start a fire that would destroy everything you've worked to build. The fireplace will need to be constructed with stones from the creek bed, mortared together with clay and lined with flat rocks that can withstand repeated heating and cooling. But before any of that can happen, you need to create the opening in the north wall, a process that will be even more complex than cutting the doorway. The afternoon is spent completing the door opening and beginning to plan the window placement. The single window will go in the east wall, positioned to catch the morning sun and provide light for the detailed work you'll need to do during the long winter evenings. Like the door, it requires precise cutting and careful framing to prevent structural weakness as you work. You're increasingly aware of how the cabin is beginning to feel like an actual living space rather than just a construction project. With the walls now high enough to provide real enclosure and the door opening defining the transition between inside and outside, you can start to imagine how the finished structure will function. As a home, the window opening proves even more challenging than the door because it requires cutting completely through logs without removing entire sections. The window itself will be covered with oiled paper or thin scraped hide to let in light while keeping out wind and cold. But the opening must be perfectly square and precisely sized to accept whatever covering material you can devise by late afternoon. You've made significant progress on both openings, but the work has been exhausting and time-consuming. Your hands are bleeding again through your gloves, and your arms shake with fatigue from the precise control required for the detailed cutting. Every muscle in your body aches from the constant strain of working in cramped positions as the light begins to fail. You realize you need to make a crucial decision about priorities. The walls could use at least one more course of logs to reach optimal height, but you also need to start gathering stones for the fireplace and begin planning the roof structure. With limited daylight hours and winter deepening every day, every choice carries significant consequences. The decision is made easier by the discovery of a problem with one of your wall logs. A crack that wasn't visible when you first fitted the timber has opened up as the wood dried, creating a gap that will let in cold air. This needs to be repaired before you can consider the walls complete. Adding yet another task to your growing list of essential work, you spend the last hour of daylight gathering stones from the creek bed for your future fireplace. The rocks are partially frozen into the creek bank, requiring careful work with your axe to free them without damaging their surfaces. Each stone must be evaluated for size, shape, and quality. The fireplace will only be as good as the materials used to build it. The stones are heavy and awkward to carry, especially with hands that are stiff with cold and slippery with blood from the day's work. You can only transport a few at a time, making multiple trips between the creek and your cabin site. By the time darkness forces you to stop, you've assembled perhaps a third of the stones you'll eventually need. That night, as you build up your fire inside the partial walls of your cabin, you take stock of your progress and the challenges ahead. The walls are nearly complete, with just one more course needed to reach optimal height. The door and window openings are roughed out and ready for final fitting. You've begun gathering materials for the fireplace and started planning the roof structure. But you're also acutely aware of how much work remains and how quickly time is passing. Every day brings colder weather and shorter periods of workable daylight. The margin for error continues to shrink as winter deepens its grip on the mountains around you. As you prepare for sleep, you can't help but feel a mixture of pride and anxiety about your progress. The cabin is beginning to look like something that could actually provide meaningful shelter. But it's still far from complete. The race between your building schedule and winter's arrival continues, with the outcome far from certain. The fire burns lower as you drift toward sleep. But the walls around you hold more heat than any shelter you've had since entering these mountains. For the first time, you can imagine not just surviving the winter, but actually living through it with some measure of comfort and security. The cabin is becoming more than just shelter, it's becoming home. Sleep comes easier now, surrounded by walls of your own making. The constant wind that's been your companion for months is broken and muffled, allowing for deeper rest than you've enjoyed and longer than you can remember. Even your dreams seem more peaceful, filled with visions of the completed cabin with smoke rising straight up from its chimney and warm light glowing from its single window. Tomorrow will bring new challenges. The complex work of building a proper fireplace, the engineering required to support a roof, and the constant pressure of time running out. But tonight, you rest in the knowledge that you've created something solid and real in the wilderness. Something that stands as proof that human determination can triumph over the most difficult circumstances. The walls around you represent more than just logs stacked upon logs. They represent hope, skill, perseverance, and the fundamental human drive to create shelter and security in an uncertain world. Each notch you've cut, each joint you've fitted, each course you've raised has been a small victory against the forces that seem determined to defeat you. As consciousness fades and sleep takes hold, you're surrounded by the fruits of your labor, rough walls that will keep you alive, openings that will soon frame a door and window, and the beginning of what might actually become a comfortable home in the wilderness. The mountain man's life is hard beyond imagining. But tonight you rest with the satisfaction of knowing you're building something that will last. Segment 5. Fire and Stone. Fifth morning arrives with a crystalline clarity that makes the very air seem brittle. When you breathe in, the cold burns your lungs, and when you breathe out, the vapor freezes so quickly it creates tiny ice crystals that fall to the ground with sounds like breaking glass. This is the kind of cold that kills unprepared men in their sleep. And you know with absolute certainty that without a proper fireplace, your partially completed cabin will become your tomb. Today begins the most technically challenging part of your entire completing project. Constructing a fireplace and chimney that will provide heat without filling your cabin with deadly smoke. This isn't simply a matter of piling stones together. The proportions must be exact, the draft properly calculated, and every joint perfectly mortared, or the entire system will fail when you need it most. You start the day by examining the stones you gathered yesterday, sorting them by size and shape. The largest, flattest rocks will form the foundation and hearth. Medium-sized stones will build the firebox walls. The smallest will be used to fill gaps and create the smooth surfaces necessary for proper airflow. Each stone must be carefully selected and positioned. There are no second chances when working with materials this heavy and permanent. The foundation of your fireplace begins with digging. Even though the ground is frozen hard, you need to excavate a rectangular pit approximately 4 feet wide and 3 feet deep where the fireplace will sit. This foundation must extend below the frost line to prevent heaving. That could crack your carefully built stonework when spring arrives, breaking through the frozen earth with nothing but your axe and knife is brutally hard work. The ground rings like iron when you strike it, and progress is measured in inches rather than feet. Your hands, already damaged from days of building work, take further punishment as you slowly chip away at the unyielding soil. But this foundation is crucial. A fireplace built on unstable ground will settle and crack, potentially causing catastrophic failure. By mid-morning, you've managed to excavate most of the foundation pit. The work has left you exhausted and bleeding, but the hole is deep enough and level enough to provide a solid base for the massive weight of stone that will rest upon it. Now comes the careful work of laying the foundation stones, each one positioned to distribute weight evenly and create a level surface for the fireplace floor. The largest stones, some weighing over 100 pounds, must be maneuvered into position with nothing but your own strength and simple leverage. You fashion crude levers from smaller logs, using them to roll and position the massive rocks exactly where they need to be. One mistake could crush your foot or hand, ending your building project and probably your life as you work. You think about the mountain men who taught themselves these skills through trial and error, often in conditions even more desperate than your current situation. Many of their first attempts probably failed, filling cabins with smoke or collapsing under their own weight. The men who survived were those who learned quickly and built wisely. Understanding that their lives depended on getting every detail right, the foundation layer takes most of the morning to complete. But when you step back to examine your work, you feel a surge of satisfaction. The stones fit together tightly with minimal gaps between them. The surface is level and solid, ready to support the weight of the firebox and chimney that will rise above it. This is precision work that would be challenging even with proper tools and unlimited time. With the foundation in place, you begin building the firebox itself. This is the heart of your heating system, where wood will burn and heat will be generated. The dimensions are critical to small, and you won't be able to burn logs large enough to provide adequate heat. Too large and the draft won't work properly. Filling your cabin with smoke instead of warmth, the back wall of the firebox must angle forward slightly as it rises, reflecting heat into the room rather than allowing it to escape up the chimney. The side walls must converge gradually, creating a throat that will accelerate the flow of smoke and improve the draft. Every stone must be carefully selected and positioned to create these precise angles without compromising. The structural integrity of the fireplace. Working with stone requires different skills than working with wood. Each rock has its own shape and character, and you must learn to see how they can fit together like pieces of a three-dimensional puzzle. Some stones need to be shaped with your axe, carefully chipping away material to create flat surfaces or adjust angles. Others must be rejected entirely if they don't contribute to the overall structure. The mortar that holds the stones together is made from clay dug from the creek bank, mixed with sand and pine needles for strength. Without proper lime cement, this crude mortar won't have the durability of modern construction, but it will hold the stones together long enough to serve your needs. The mix must be just right to wet, and it won't support the weight of the stones. Too dry, and it won't create a proper sealed by midday. You've completed the first course of the firebox, with stones carefully fitted and mortared into place. The work is painstakingly slow, but each stone that finds its proper position brings you closer to a heating system that will keep you alive through the winter. You can already envision how the finished fireplace will look, with flames dancing on the hearth and heat radiating into your cabin. The afternoon brings new challenges as the firebox walls rise higher. Each course of stones must be perfectly level and properly aligned, or the entire structure will become unstable. You use a piece of string tied to stakes as a guide, constantly checking to ensure that your walls remain straight and your angles stay true. The attention to detail required is exhausting, but any shortcuts now could result in disaster later as you work. You're constantly aware of the dropping temperature and the darkening sky. Snow clouds are building on the horizon, and you can feel the pressure changing in a way that promises significant weather within the next day or two. If you're caught with an incomplete fireplace when the next storm hits, you'll have no choice but to heat your cabin with an open fire on the dirt floor. A dangerous practice that could easily result in your death from smoke inhalation or burns. The firebox reaches waist height by late afternoon. with the back wall properly angled and the side walls beginning to converge toward the throat. The stonework is rough but solid, with each rock carefully selected and positioned to contribute to both strength and function. This isn't beautiful masonry by any civilized standard, but it's workmanship that will serve its essential purpose as darkness approaches. You face another crucial decision about priorities. The firebox is perhaps half complete, but you still need to build the throat, the smoke chamber, and the chimney itself before the fireplace will be functional. At the same time, you haven't yet started on the roof structure, and every day of delay makes that work more difficult as snow accumulates on your building materials. The decision is made for you when the temperature drops sharply as the sun disappears behind the western peaks. The stones you've been working with become almost too cold to handle, and the mortar begins to stiffen before you can properly work it into the joints. Weather conditions are forcing you to stop masonry work whether you want to or not. You spend the last hour of daylight gathering more firewood and making preparations for what promises to be the coldest night yet. The partial fireplace provides some wind protection, but it won't be functional for heating until the chimney is complete. Tonight, you'll still depend on your open fire and the partial shelter of your cabin walls. That evening, as you sit beside your fire studying the half-built fireplace by flickering light, you can't help but feel both progress and pressure. The stonework represents hours of careful labor and genuine skill development, but it's still far from complete. The race against winter continues, with each passing day bringing colder weather and shorter working hours. The night is indeed the coldest yet, with temperatures dropping far below anything you've experienced since entering these mountains. Even inside your partial walls, water freezes solid within minutes of being poured. Your breath creates fog so thick you can barely see across the small cabin space, and the fire seems to provide barely enough heat to keep you from freezing solid. But the progress on your fireplace gives you hope. For the first time, you can see how the completed heating system will transform your crude shelter into something approaching comfort. The vision of sitting beside a proper hearth, with flames dancing on stone and heat radiating into every corner of your cabin, provides motivation to continue despite the seemingly impossible challenges ahead. Sleep comes fitfully, interrupted by the need to constantly tend the fire and the discomfort of temperatures that threaten to freeze any exposed skin. But even in the brief periods of rest, your mind continues working on the problems of fireplace construction. How to build the throat properly, how to calculate the chimney height for adequate draft, how to create a cap that will keep out snow while allowing smoke to escape. These technical challenges represent the difference between amateur building and genuine craftsmanship. Anyone can stack stones, but creating a heating system that works efficiently and safely requires understanding principles of airflow, heat transfer, and structural engineering that most people never consider. The mountain men who mastered these skills were engineers and architects by necessity, forced to become experts in subjects they'd never formally studied. As dawn approaches and the fire burns low, you're surrounded by the evidence of your growing expertise. The cabin walls stand straight and true, fitted with joints that would challenge a professional carpenter. The fireplace foundation is solid and level, ready to support tons of stone. The firebox rises with carefully calculated angles that will soon direct heat into your living space. Each element of your construction represents knowledge gained through necessity and skill developed through practice. The wilderness is a harsh teacher, but those who survive its lessons emerge with capabilities they never knew they possessed. Tomorrow will bring new challenges in the ongoing race to complete your shelter before winter's full fury arrives. But tonight, as you rest between the walls you've built with your own hands, beside the fireplace you're constructing stone by stone, you can feel the satisfaction that comes from creating something substantial and lasting in the face of overwhelming odds. The cabin is becoming more than shelter. It's becoming proof of what human determination can accomplish when failure simply isn't an option. Segment 6. The weight of wood and weather. 6th dawn breaks gray and ominous, with heavy clouds pressing down on the mountain peaks like a wool blanket. The air carries that metallic taste that experienced outdoorsmen recognize as the precursor to serious weather. And you know without checking the sky that you have, perhaps? One more day of working weather before the next storm arrives. This morning brings a sobering realization as you survey your progress. While you've made remarkable advances on your fireplace and cabin walls, you've barely begun to address the most structurally complex part of your entire project, the roof. Without a proper roof, everything else you've built will be worthless when heavy snow begins to accumulate. A cabin without adequate overhead. Protection is just an expensive way to freeze, too. Death in relative comfort. The fireplace work must continue. You're too close to completion to stop now, but you also need to begin the demanding process of selecting, preparing, and raising the timbers that will support your roof structure. This means working on 2 complex projects simultaneously, each requiring skills and techniques you're still learning through necessity and trial. You begin the day by adding another course of stones to your fireplace. Working quickly before the dropping temperature makes the mortar too stiff to use effectively. Your hands are so cold you can barely feel the stones, but the muscle memory developed over the past day guides your work. Each rock finds its place with less hesitation than before, and the firebox continues to take shape with walls that rise, straight and true. The throat of the fireplace, the narrow opening where the firebox transitions to the smoke chamber, requires the most precise stonework of the entire project. This opening must be exactly the right size to create proper draft without allowing heat to escape too quickly. Too large, and your precious heat will rush up the chimney instead of warming your cabin. Too small, and smoke will back up into your living space, making the shelter uninhabitable. You work with stones you've carefully selected for their flat surfaces and regular shapes, fitting them together like pieces of an architectural puzzle. The joints must be tight and the angles exact, requiring constant measurement and adjustment. This is precision work that would challenge a professional mason, and you're attempting it with crude tools and materials while working against steadily worsening weather conditions. By mid-morning, you've completed the throat and begun work on the smoke chamber, the expanded area above the firebox where smoke can gather before being drawn up the chimney. This section requires different techniques, with stones gradually corbelled outward to create the necessary expansion. Each course must be stable enough to support its own weight while providing a foundation for the stones above. But the approaching weather won't wait for you to complete your masonry work. Snow has begun to fall. Not the gentle dusting of previous days, but serious flakes that accumulate quickly on your work surfaces and make handling stones increasingly difficult. You're forced to make another crucial decision: continue with the fireplace and risk being caught without roof timbers prepared, or switch to roof construction and leave your heating system incomplete. The decision is made easier by the discovery that several of your prepared logs have developed cracks as they've dried, making them unsuitable for the critical roof structure. You need to fell additional trees specifically for rafters and ridge beams. Work that requires good weather and adequate daylight. The fireplace, while essential, can wait another day if necessary. A collapsed roof will kill you just as surely as inadequate heat. You abandon the stonework reluctantly and turn your attention to the forest surrounding your clearing. The roof structure will require dozens of precisely sized timbers, a main ridge beam to span the length of the cabin, rafters to extend from the ridge to the walls, and cross-bracing to tie everything together. Each piece must be carefully selected and prepared, with dimensions calculated to support tons of accumulated snow. The ridge beam represents the most critical component of your entire roof system. This massive timber must span the 12-foot length of your cabin without sagging, supporting the weight of all the rafters and whatever snow load winter deposits on your roof. You need a tree that's perfectly straight, at least 14 inches in diameter, and absolutely free from defects that could cause failure under load. Finding such a tree in the forest round your clearing requires careful scouting through increasingly difficult conditions. The snow is falling heavily now, making footing treacherous and visibility poor. But you eventually locate a magnificent lodgepole pine that meets all your requirements, straight as an arrow, the right diameter, and positioned where it can be felled safely without destroying other timber you might need. Cutting this tree in heavy snow presents challenges you haven't faced before. The accumulating precipitation makes your axe handle slippery and your footing uncertain. Snow fills your cuts as fast as you can make them, requiring constant clearing to maintain accuracy. But the work progresses steadily, and by midday, the massive pine crashes to the forest floor, shaking snow from surrounding trees and sending birds scattering in alarm. Limbing and preparing the ridge beam requires the rest of the afternoon, working in conditions that grow more difficult by the hour. The temperature continues to drop, and the wind picks up, driving snow horizontally across the clearing with enough force to sting exposed skin. Your hands are so cold you can barely maintain your grip on the axe, but the work cannot wait for better weather. As you strip branches from the fallen giant, you're struck by the enormity of what you're attempting. This single log weighs well over 1,000 pounds and must somehow be lifted to the top of your cabin walls, a height of nearly 8 feet. Using nothing but muscle power and simple mechanical advantage. Men have died attempting similar feats, crushed under timber they couldn't control or injured by equipment failure at crucial moments. The beam is finally clean and ready by late afternoon, but the approaching darkness and worsening weather make it impossible to attempt raising it today. This massive timber will have to wait until tomorrow, adding another day to a construction schedule that's already being compressed by winter's relentless advance. That evening, as you huddle beside your fire in the incomplete cabin, you study the ridge beam lying in the snow outside your walls. Tomorrow, you'll face one of the most dangerous and technically challenging aspects of your entire hewn project, lifting that massive timber to its final position using nothing but ropes, levers, and determination. The physics are straightforward enough, but the execution will test every skill you've developed and some you haven't yet mastered. The night brings the heaviest snowfall since you began building, with accumulation that transforms your worksite into a winter wonderland that's beautiful but ominous. By morning, the ridge beam is buried under nearly a foot of new snow, and drifts have formed against your cabin walls that reach almost to the window opening. The wilderness is doing everything in its power to bury your work before it can be completed. But the storm also brings an unexpected benefit. The heavy snow provides excellent insulation for the cabin interior. The partial walls trap warm air more effectively than ever before, and the snow drifting against the exterior surfaces creates an additional barrier against wind and cold. For the first time since beginning construction, the interior temperature remains above freezing throughout the night. You wake to silence, the complete, muffled quiet that comes only with heavy snow cover. When you peer out through your doorway, the world has been transformed into a landscape of white curves and softened edges. Your timber and tools are buried under snow that will need to be cleared before any work can begin. But the beauty of the scene is undeniable. The morning is spent digging out your work area and preparing for the massive undertaking of raising the ridge beam. You clear snow from the buried timber and set up the system of ramps and pulleys that will enable you to lift it into position. This is engineering work of the most practical kind, calculating angles and forces with your life depending on getting the mathematics right. The technique you'll use is ancient but effective, a combination of inclined planes, levers and brute force that's been used to move massive stones and timbers for thousands of years. The ridge beam will be rolled up a ramp to the wall height, then carefully maneuvered into position using ropes and wooden levers. Simple in concept, but requiring precise execution to avoid disaster as you make your preparations. You can't help but think about the thousands of men who've attempted similar projects in these mountains. Some succeeded, creating shelters that kept them alive through brutal winters. Others failed, their bones scattered through forests where their cabins never stood complete. The difference between success and failure often came down to tiny margins, a rope that held or broke, a calculation that proved right or wrong, a moment of strength or weakness at a crucial time. Today, you'll discover which category you fall into. The ridge beam must be raised, the roof structure must be started, and winter won't wait for you to develop the skills you need. The mountain men who survived weren't necessarily the strongest or the smartest. They were the ones who found ways to accomplish the impossible when their lives depended on it. The storm has passed, leaving behind a crystalline world of white perfection, but also adding urgency to your work. Every day brings shorter daylight hours and colder temperatures. Every delay makes the remaining work more difficult and dangerous. The race against winter continues, with the outcomes still far from certain and the stakes as high as they can possibly be. Your life, measured against the changing seasons and your own determination to see. Another spring. Segment 7. Raising the bones of shelter. The morning of the 7th day dawns clear and cold, with sunlight reflecting off the fresh snow in patterns that make your eyes water from the brilliance. The storm has passed, but it's left behind nearly 18 inches of new snow and temperatures so low that your breath creates clouds that hang in the still air like visible reminders of how close you are to the edge of survival. Today marks perhaps the most crucial single day of your entire building project. The ridge beam, that massive timber that will form the backbone of your roof, must be raised to its final position 8 feet above the ground. This isn't just heavy lifting. It's precision engineering using only rope, wood, and human determination. One mistake could destroy weeks of work or, more likely, crush you under 1,000 pounds of falling pine. You begin by clearing snow from your work area, creating paths where you'll need to move and position equipment. The ridge beam lies buried like a sleeping giant, visible only as a long mound in the white landscape. Digging it out requires an hour of steady work, but reveals the timber in perfect condition, straight, solid, and ready for its crucial role in your survival. The lifting system you've devised is based on principles as old as civilization itself, a combination of inclined planes and mechanical advantage that's been used to build pyramids, cathedrals, and countless humble structures in between. You've constructed a ramp against the north wall of your cabin, using smaller logs to create an incline that rises from ground level to the top of your walls. The ramp itself represents a significant engineering challenge. It must be strong enough to support the weight of the ridge beam as it's rolled upward, but also provide enough traction to prevent the massive timber from sliding backward. You've laid smaller logs perpendicular to the main ramp supports, creating a corduroy surface that should grip the ridge beam and control its movement. 2 rope systems will guide and control the beam's ascent. One rope, looped around the timber near its center point, runs up and over a pulley mounted on a tall tripod beyond the cabin. This will provide the main lifting force. A second rope, attached to the top end of the beam, allows you to control the timber's angle and prevent it from rolling off the ramp during the lift. The pulley system uses a block carved from a piece of hardwood and mounted on a tripod, made from 3 straight poles lashed together at the top. This isn't sophisticated equipment by any standard, but it should provide enough mechanical advantage to make the lift possible for one man working alone. The key word being should. You won't know if your calculations are correct till you commit to the attempt. You test every component of your lifting system multiple times, checking rope knots, examining the ramp structure, and verifying that the pulley moves freely. This is work where failure isn't just inconvenient, it could be fatal. The ridge beam weighs more than most horses, and if it falls at the wrong moment, there won't be enough left of you to bury properly. The initial positioning requires rolling the massive timber to the base of your ramp. Even this preliminary work is exhausting, requiring levers and careful technique to move the beam without damaging it or injuring yourself. The timber is awkward and heavy, with a tendency to roll in unexpected directions if you don't maintain perfect control. By mid-morning, everything is in position for the actual lift. The ridge beam sits at the base of the ramp, secured with ropes that run through your pulley system. Your hands are already bleeding through your gloves from the morning's work, and every muscle in your body aches from the preliminary labor. But the real test is just beginning. The first few feet of the lift go surprisingly well. The pulley system provides significant mechanical advantage, and the ridge beam rolls smoothly up the ramp with each pull on the rope. But as the angle increases and more of the timber's weight comes to bear on your lifting system, the work becomes exponentially more difficult. Halfway up the ramp, disaster nearly strikes. One of the cross pieces supporting the ramp structure begins to crack under the load, creating a sound like a gunshot in the cold morning air. For a terrifying moment, you're certain the entire system is about to collapse, sending the ridge beam crashing back to the ground, and probably taking you with it. You quickly tie off the lifting rope and examine the damage. The cracked timber is still holding, but barely. Any additional stress will cause complete failure. This is exactly the kind of critical decision point that separates successful mountain men from the ones who don't live to tell their stories. Do you continue with damaged equipment and risk catastrophic failure, or do you abort the lift and spend precious time rebuilding your system? The decision is made easier by the sight of more storm clouds building on the western horizon. Weather is coming again, probably within the next day or two. If you don't get the ridge beam in position today, you may not get another chance before conditions become impossible for this kind of work. You reinforce the cracked timber with additional supports, lashing smaller logs alongside the damaged piece to distribute the load. It's not a perfect solution, but it should hold long enough to complete the lift. This is frontier engineering at its most basic, making do with available materials and accepting calculated risks because the alternatives are worse. The lift continues, inch by agonizing inch. Your hands are slippery with blood despite your gloves, and your arms shake with the effort of maintaining tension on the rope. Every foot of progress requires multiple pulls, with frequent pauses to rest and check your equipment. The ridge beam seems to gain weight as it rises, defying the laws of physics through sheer stubbornness. 3/4 of the way up the ramp, you encounter another problem. The angle has become so steep that the ridge beam wants to roll backward faster than you can pull it forward. The rope system that worked perfectly at ground level is barely adequate at this extreme angle. You're forced to tie off the lifting rope and devise an additional bunkering system to prevent backward slippage, using every piece of spare rope you possess. You create a web of guy lines that hold the ridge beam in position while you adjust your pulling angle. This improvised rigging looks chaotic, but provides the security you need to continue the lift safely. It's another example of the kind of creative problem-solving that keeps men alive in the wilderness when conventional solutions aren't available. The final few feet of the lift test every component of your system and every fiber of your determination. The ridge beam is nearly vertical now, requiring perfect balance and control to guide it onto the wall plates where it will rest. One moment of inattention or equipment failure would send the massive timber crashing down, destroying weeks of work and quite possibly you along with it. But finally, miraculously, the ridge beam reaches the top of your cabin walls. With careful manipulation of your rope systems, You're able to guide it into position along the center line of the structure, where it settles into the notches you've prepared with a solid thunk that seems to echo across the valley. The backbone of your roof is in place. The satisfaction of this achievement is overwhelming. That massive timber, which was just another tree in the forest this morning, is now the central structural element of what will become your shelter against winter. Every ounce of effort invested in the lift has been justified by this moment of success, but there's no time to rest or celebrate. With the ridge beam in position, you can begin installing the rafters that will extend from the ridge to the walls, creating the sloped surfaces that will shed snow and rain. These smaller timbers are much easier to handle individually, but there are dozens of them required, and each must be precisely cut and fitted. The rafter installation goes more quickly than the ridge beam lift, but it's still demanding work that requires constant attention to detail. Each rafter must be cut to exactly the right length, with precise angles at both ends to ensure a tight fit against the ridge beam and wall plate. The spacing between rafters must be uniform to distribute roof loads evenly by late afternoon. You've installed rafters along one side of your cabin roof. The structure is beginning to look like it could actually shed water and support snow loads, though there's still much work to be done. Cross-bracing between rafters, roof decking, and some kind of waterproof covering will all be required before your shelter is complete. As darkness approaches and the temperature drops, you take stock of the day's progress. The ridge beam is in place. A significant number of rafters are installed, and your cabin is beginning to look like a real building rather than just walls stacked in the wilderness. But you're also acutely aware of how much work remains and how quickly the weather window is closing. That night, sleeping inside walls that now support the beginnings of a real roof structure, you feel a change in the cabin's character. The space feels more enclosed, more permanent, more like a place where someone could actually live rather than simply survive. The psychological impact of having overhead structure, even incomplete, transforms your shelter in ways that go beyond simple weather protection. The night brings lighter snowfall, but significantly colder temperatures. Inside your partial walls, with the beginnings of a roof overhead, the interior stays remarkably warm. The structure is beginning to function as intended, creating a microclimate that's dramatically different from the harsh conditions outside. You sleep better than you have since beginning the building project, though you're still awakened several times by the need to tend your fire. Each time you wake, you look up at the rafters visible in the firelight and feel the satisfaction that comes from creating something substantial with your own hands. The cabin is no longer just a dream or a desperate necessity. It's becoming reality. Timber by timber and day by day, morning will bring new challenges as you continue the race to complete your shelter before winter's full fury arrives. But tonight, you rest under the beginnings of a roof you've built yourself, surrounded by walls that have stood firm against everything the wilderness has thrown at them. The mountain man's life is hard beyond imagination, but moments like this make it all worthwhile. It's a profound satisfaction of creating shelter in the face of seemingly impossible odds. Asterisk. The eighth morning brings with it a peculiar quality of light that experienced mountain men learn to recognize and fear. The sky has that yellowish-gray cast that speaks of serious weather building beyond the peaks, and the air carries a heaviness that makes every breath feel substantial. You know without consulting any barometer that you have perhaps one more day of working, whether before the next major storm arrives. This knowledge adds urgency to every movement as you emerge from your partially completed cabin and survey the work that remains. The ridge beam stands proud against the morning sky, and roughly half the rafters are in place, but the roof structure is still far from complete. More critically, you have no covering over the framework, meaning that any significant snowfall will accumulate inside your shelter just as readily as outside. The morning's first task is completing the rafter installation on both sides of the ridge beam. Each timber must be carefully measured, cut to precise angles, and fitted into place with the same attention to detail you've maintained throughout the project. There can be no shortcuts now. A poorly fitted rafter could fail under snow load, potentially causing a catastrophic collapse that would destroy everything you've worked to build. You work with an efficiency born of necessity and growing skill. Your hands have developed the calluses and muscle memory that come from weeks of intensive construction work. The axe feels like an extension of your body now, and you can judge cuts and angles with an accuracy that would have been impossible when you started this project. Experience is a harsh teacher, but those who survive its lessons emerge with capabilities they never knew they possessed. The rafter work progresses steadily through the morning, each timber finding its place in the growing framework. The roof structure begins to take on the classic peaked shape that will shed snow and rain effectively, while providing maximum interior volume for the given wall height. This isn't just construction, it's architecture of the most practical kind, where form follows function with mathematical precision. By midday, you've completed the basic rafter installation, but the framework still needs cross-bracing to prevent racking under wind loads. These diagonal braces running between rafters at regular intervals provide the structural stability that transforms collection of individual timbers into a unified roof system, capable of withstanding the enormous forces that mountain weather can generate. The cross-bracing installation requires working at height, balancing on the rafters while handling tools and materials. This is dangerous work under any circumstances, but particularly hazardous when working alone in deteriorating weather conditions. A fall from this height could easily result in broken bones, or worse, effectively ending your chances of completing the cabin before winter kills you. You work carefully but quickly, cutting and installing braces while keeping constant watch on the darkening sky. The temperature is dropping steadily, and the wind is beginning to pick up sure signs that weather is moving in faster than you'd hoped. Each brace you install makes the entire roof structure more stable, but there are dozens required to complete the system properly. The afternoon brings the first scattered snowflakes, harbingers of what's building beyond the peaks. You push yourself harder, working through increasing cold and wind to install as many braces as possible before conditions force you to stop. Your hands are numb inside your gloves, and your feet have lost most feeling. But the work continues with the desperation of a man who knows his life depends on every timber properly placed. As you work, you're constantly aware of how exposed you are on the partially completed roof structure. The wind tries to tear you from your precarious perch, and the cold makes every movement clumsy and uncertain. This is exactly the kind of work that kills mountain men, not dramatic encounters with bears or hostile tribes, but simple accidents during essential tasks performed under impossible conditions. But the roof framework continues to take shape, brace by brace and joint by joint. The structure is becoming remarkably solid, with each added timber contributing to the overall strength and stability. When you step back to examine your work, you can see how the individual components have been transformed into something greater than the sum of their parts, a unified system capable of protecting human life against the worst that winter can. Delivered by late afternoon, the basic roof framework is complete, but you still face the critical challenge of providing some kind of covering before the approaching storm arrives. Without decking and weatherproofing, your carefully constructed framework will do little to keep snow and wind out of your living space. You need to create at least a temporary covering that can be improved and refined as conditions permit. The solution comes from materials you've been accumulating throughout the building process: the bark you've stripped from logs, the pine boughs you've trimmed from timbers, and smaller branches you've saved instead of burning. These natural materials can be layered and overlapped to create a roof covering that's not permanent but should provide adequate protection until you can install something more substantial dot working in increasing wind and cold. You begin laying the first layer of bark sheets across the rafters. These large pieces, some over 6 feet long, must be positioned with their edges overlapping like shingles to shed water effectively. The work requires constant climbing up and down from the roof structure, carrying materials and positioning them while fighting the wind that seems determined to tear everything from your grasp. The bark installation is complicated by the fact that the material becomes brittle in the cold, cracking easily if handled roughly. Each piece must be positioned carefully to avoid damage, then secured with whatever fastening materials you can devise. Strips of rawhide, wooden pegs, and even stones provide the anchoring necessary to keep the covering in place against wind loads as darkness approaches and the snow begins falling more heavily. You realize you won't be able to complete the entire roof covering before weather forces you to stop. But you've managed to cover roughly half the structure, including the area directly over your intended living space. This partial covering should provide enough protection to make the cabin habitable while you work on completing the remaining sections. The temperature drops sharply as the sun disappears behind the storm clouds, and the wind increases to a level that makes further roof work impossible. You're forced to abandon the covering installation and retreat to the partial shelter of your cabin, where you can assess your progress and plan for riding out the approaching storm. That evening, as you build your fire inside the partially roofed structure, you're amazed by the difference even incomplete covering makes. The portion of the cabin under the new roof is dramatically warmer and more comfortable than the areas still open to the sky. For the first time since beginning construction, you have a space that feels genuinely sheltered rather than just partially protected. The storm arrives during the night with a ferocity that surpasses anything you've experienced since entering these mountains. Wind howls around your cabin with sounds like voices screaming in the darkness, and snow drives horizontally past your door opening with enough force to sting any exposed skin. But inside your partially completed shelter, you remain relatively warm and dry. The covered portion of your roof holds perfectly, shedding snow and wind without any signs of stress or failure. The uncovered area accumulates snow that will need to be cleared before work can resume. But the basic structure shows no signs of damage from the storm. Your engineering and construction have proven sound under the first real test of severe weather. You spend the storm-bound hours making repairs to your tools and equipment, sharpening your axe, mending your gloves, and planning the work that remains to complete your shelter. The enforced rest gives you time to appreciate how far you've come in just over a week from sleeping completely exposed to having genuine shelter against one of the worst storms you've encountered. The night passes slowly, with the constant sound of wind and driving snow serving as a reminder of what would have been your fate if caught without shelter. But inside your cabin, you're warm and dry, protected by walls and roof structure you've built with your own hands from the raw materials of the forest. The satisfaction of this achievement helps carry you through the long hours until dawn, when morning finally arrives. The storm has passed, leaving behind a world transformed by snow and wind. Drifts reach nearly to your window opening in some places, and the entire landscape has been sculpted into new shapes by the wind. But your cabin stands solid and unchanged. Having weathered its first major test without failure, the partial roof covering has performed exactly as intended, keeping the main living area dry while allowing snow to accumulate only in the uncovered sections. This proves that your construction techniques and materials are sound, giving you confidence that the completed structure will provide adequate protection throughout the winter months ahead. As you dig out from the storm and assess what needs to be done to complete your shelter, you realize you've crossed a crucial threshold. The cabin is no longer just a construction project, it's become genuine shelter, a place where human life can be sustained even in the face of severe weather. The race against winter continues, but you're no longer running behind the season. you're keeping pace with its demands. The morning's work begins with clearing snow from your work areas and assessing any damage from the storm. But as you step outside your partially completed but genuinely protective shelter, you feel a satisfaction that goes beyond simple pride in workmanship. You've created something real and substantial in the wilderness, a testament to human determination and skill that will stand against whatever challenges the remaining winter months might bring. Segment 9. The Heart of Home Thaw. Ninth morning dawns with crystalline clarity after the storm, revealing a landscape so transformed by snow and wind that you barely recognize your own clearing. Drifts have sculpted the terrain into flowing white curves, and your cabin stands like an island of dark timber in an ocean of pristine snow. But most importantly, it stands solid, intact, and having proven itself against the first serious test of mountain weather, the storm has also brought an unexpected gift. The enforced rest has allowed your battered hands to begin healing, and your overtaxed muscles have recovered enough strength for the demanding work that lies ahead. Today, you face what may be the most technically challenging aspect of your entire building project: constructing a fireplace and chimney that will not only provide heat, but do so without filling your shelter with deadly smoke. You begin by digging out the stonework you abandoned when the storm struck. The partially completed firebox is buried under nearly 2 feet of snow, but when you clear it away, you find the masonry in perfect condition. The mortar has had time to cure, and the stones have settled into solid, permanent positions. Your crude construction techniques have produced results that are both functional and durable. With the basic firebox structure already in place, you can focus on the most critical elements of the fireplace system: the smoke chamber, the throat, and the chimney itself. These components must work together with mathematical precision to create the draft necessary to draw smoke up and out, while retaining as much heat as possible in your living space. Get the proportions wrong, and you'll have built an elaborate suicide device instead of a heating system. The smoke chamber, the expanded area above the firebox, where smoke can gather before being drawn up the chimney, requires careful corbelling of stones to create the necessary shape. Each course must project slightly beyond the one below, gradually expanding the interior volume while maintaining structural stability. This is precision masonry work that would challenge a professional, and you're attempting it with crude tools and improvised materials. You work methodically, selecting each stone for its contribution to both strength and function. The interior surfaces must be as smooth as possible to prevent turbulence that could disrupt the airflow, while the exterior must maintain clean lines that won't compromise the structural integrity of your cabin walls. Every stone placement is a three-dimensional puzzle that affects both the current course and all the work that will follow. The mortar you're using, a mixture of clay, sand, and pine needles, isn't as durable as modern cement, but it's adequate for your needs and made entirely from materials available in the wilderness. The key is achieving the right consistency, wet enough to bond the stones together, but stiff enough to support their weight while curing. Too much moisture, and the mortar will squeeze out under load. Too little, and it won't create proper adhesion by midday. You've completed the smoke chamber and begun work on the throat, the critical transition point where the expanded chamber narrows to meet the chimney proper. This opening must be precisely sized to create optimal draft conditions. Too large and heat will escape too quickly. Too small and smoke will back up into your living space. The calculations are complex, based on ratios that medieval masons developed through centuries of trial and error. The throat construction requires your most precise stonework yet. You need to create a smooth, gradually narrowing passage that accelerates the flow of smoke without creating turbulence. This means selecting stones with very specific shapes and fitting them together with joints so tight that smoke cannot find alternate paths through the masonry. Each stone must be carefully shaped with your axe, chipping away material to create surfaces that fit together perfectly as you work. You're constantly aware of how this fireplace will transform your cabin from mere shelter into genuine living space. The ability to maintain comfortable temperatures throughout the winter, to cook food properly, and to provide light during the long, dark months ahead will make the difference between surviving and truly living in your wilderness home. The afternoon brings new challenges as you begin constructing the chimney itself. This vertical passage must rise at least 3 feet above your highest roofline to create adequate draft, while remaining perfectly straight and maintaining consistent interior dimensions. Any deviation from vertical could cause smoke to accumulate and back up, while variations in internal size could create turbulence that disrupts the airflow. Building a straight, vertical chimney using irregularly shaped stones and crude tools requires techniques that go far beyond simple stacking. You create guidelines using string lines attached to stakes, constantly checking that each course remains level and properly aligned. The work is slow and demanding, requiring constant attention to detail and frequent measurement to ensure accuracy. The stones for the chimney must be carefully selected for their ability to withstand repeated heating and cooling cycles without cracking. River rocks, which may contain trapped moisture, could explode when heated, potentially destroying your entire fireplace system. You choose only stones that are completely dry and free from internal fractures, testing each one by striking it with your axe to listen for the clear ring that indicates solid material. As the chimney rises course by course, you begin to see how the completed fireplace will transform your cabin's character. The massive stone structure dominates the north wall, but in a way that speaks of permanence and security rather than intrusion. This isn't just a heating system, it's the heart of your home, the focal point around which winter life will revolve. The work continues through the afternoon, with each course of stones bringing you closer to completion. Your hands are bleeding again through your gloves, and your back aches from the constant bending and lifting. But the satisfaction of seeing the chimney take shape provides motivation to continue despite the discomfort. This is work that directly translates to survival. Every stone, properly placed, is another degree of warmth when the temperature drops below zero by late afternoon. The chimney has risen above the level of your roofline, with just a few more courses needed to reach the optimal height for proper draft. But the light is failing, and the temperature is dropping rapidly as the sun disappears behind the western peaks. You're forced to stop masonry work for the day, but the fireplace system is nearly complete and ready for its first test. That evening, you build your fire directly in the new firebox for the first time. As the flames catch and begin to grow, you watch anxiously to see whether your construction will perform as intended. For several tense minutes, smoke billows into the cabin, and you fear you've made some critical error in the design or construction. But then, as the fire grows stronger and the chimney begins to warm, you hear the subtle change in sound that indicates the draft is beginning to work. The smoke starts to draw upward, pulled by the temperature difference between the interior of the chimney and the cold outside air. Within minutes, the firebox is burning cleanly, with all smoke disappearing up the chimney and none escaping into your living space. The transformation is remarkable. For the first time since entering these mountains, you have genuine heat that doesn't come with the penalty of smoke-filled air. The stone firebox radiates warmth throughout the cabin, and the flames provide light that makes the interior space seem almost cozy despite its rough construction. This is what your months of labor have been building toward, a space where human life be sustained in comfort rather than mere survival. As you sit beside your new fireplace, feeling heat soak into muscles that have been cold for longer than you care to remember, you realize you've achieved something extraordinary. Starting with nothing but trees standing in the forest, you've created genuine shelter using only hand tools and techniques learned through necessity. The cabin may be crude by civilized standards, but it's solid, functional, and capable of sustaining life through the harshest conditions. These mountains can deliver. The night passes comfortably for the first time in months. The fireplace maintains steady heat throughout the small space, and the properly designed chimney draws smoke cleanly without filling the interior with fumes. You sleep deeply, no longer awakened by cold or the need to constantly tend an open fire. The cabin has finally become what you envisioned when you first selected this site, a genuine home in the wilderness. Morning brings new appreciation for what you've accomplished. The cabin interior is warm and comfortable, with no trace of smoke or cold drafts. The fireplace has performed perfectly through its first night of operation, proving that your construction techniques and materials are sound. More importantly, you now have the heating system necessary to survive even the harshest weather that winter can bring to these mountains as you prepare breakfast in your new home, cooking over coals drawn from the fireplace rather than an open fire on the dirt floor. You feel a satisfaction that goes beyond simple pride in workmanship. You've not just built a cabin, you've created a space where human civilization can exist in the midst of wilderness. The rough log walls and stone fireplace represent more than shelter. They represent the triumph of human determination over seemingly impossible odds. The cabin stands complete in all its essential elements: walls that keep out wind and cold, a roof that sheds snow and rain, and a fireplace that provides heat and light. What began as desperate necessity has become genuine comfort. Crude perhaps, but entirely adequate for sustaining life through whatever challenges the remaining winter months might bring. You've built more than shelter. You've built a home. Asterisk, the 10th morning breaks clear and cold, with sunlight streaming through the single window opening to illuminate the interior of what has truly become your home. The transformation is remarkable. What was raw wilderness just over a week ago is now a space where human life not only survives, but can actually flourish. Through the harshest months of the year, but completion of the basic structure only marks the beginning of a new phase of work. A cabin that will truly sustain life through a mountain winter needs more than just walls, roof, and fireplace. It needs the countless small improvements and refinements that transform crude shelter into genuine living space. Proper food storage, adequate lighting, efficient workspace organization, and the many minor comforts that prevent a man from going mad. During months of isolation, today's work begins with one of the most essential tasks you've been postponing: chinking the gaps between your logs. Despite your best efforts to fit the timbers tightly together, settling and drying have opened cracks that let in cold air and drive up your heating requirements. These gaps must be sealed with a mixture of clay, moss, and pine needles that will expand and contract with the wood while keeping out wind and moisture. The chinking process requires you to examine every joint between every log, identifying gaps and preparing the proper mixture to fill them. The clay comes from deposits you found along the creek bank, while the moss is gathered from the north sides of trees where it grows thick and healthy. The pine needles provide fiber that helps bind the mixture together and prevents cracking as it dries, working from the inside out. You carefully pack the chinking mixture into every gap, using your fingers and crude wooden tools to ensure complete coverage. This is tedious work that requires attention to detail rather than strength, but it's essential for creating a truly weatherproof envelope. Each gap sealed makes your heating system more efficient and your comfort level more sustainable. The process reveals imperfections in your construction that weren't apparent during the initial building phase. Some joints that seemed tight when first cut have opened as the wood dried, while others have remained solid and stable. You learn to read these changes as part of your ongoing education in working with natural materials, understanding that wood is a living substance that continues to move and change long after it's been cut. By mid-morning, you've completed chinking the interior walls and can already feel the difference in comfort level. The cabin holds heat more effectively, and the constant small drafts that had been stealing warmth are eliminated. This improvement in thermal efficiency means your carefully gathered firewood will last longer and your living space will remain comfortable even during the coldest weather. The next priority is improving your food storage capabilities. The small amount of jerky you've been living on won't sustain you through the long winter months ahead, and you need systems for preserving and protecting whatever game you can harvest. This means building proper storage containers, creating hanging systems to keep food away from rodents, and establishing preservation techniques that will prevent spoilage. You begin by constructing a simple but effective cache system inside the cabin. Using split boards left over from your floor construction, you build a raised platform against one wall that will keep food supplies off the dirt floor and away from moisture. Above this platform, you install a series of hooks and hanging points, where meat can be suspended to dry and cure. The storage system is simple but effective, based on techniques developed by mountain men over decades of wilderness living. Dried meat hangs in the warmest part of the cabin where air circulation helps prevent mold and spoilage. Root vegetables and other preserved foods are stored in containers that protect them from rodents while allowing air circulation. Everything has its place in the carefully organized system that makes maximum use of limited space. The afternoon brings work on improving your lighting capabilities. The single window provides adequate illumination during daylight hours, but the long winter nights ahead will require artificial lighting for the detailed work necessary to maintain your equipment and prepare food. This means creating oil lamps using materials available in the wilderness. You fashion crude but functional lamps from pieces of bark formed into bowl shapes and filled with rendered animal fat. Wicks made from twisted plant fibers provide the flame that converts the fat into steady, if smoky, illumination. These primitive lights won't provide the brightness of modern electric bulbs, but they'll give you enough light to work by during the dark months ahead. The lamp construction requires careful attention to fire safety in your confined wooden space. Each lamp must be designed and positioned to prevent accidental ignition of surrounding materials, while providing maximum useful light. You create stable bases and protective shields that contain the flame, while allowing light to illuminate your work areas as you work on these improvements. You're struck by how each small addition makes the cabin feel more like a permanent home rather than temporary shelter. The storage systems, lighting improvements, and numerous small refinements transform the space from a place where you merely survive into one where you can actually live with some measure of comfort and dignity. The late afternoon is spent on what might seem like luxury items, but are actually essential for mental health during long isolation. Creating some basic furniture beyond the sleeping platform and crude table you've already built. A proper chair, shelving for personal items, and workspace improvements that make daily tasks more efficient and comfortable. The chair construction uses techniques similar to those you've already mastered for other furniture, but refined through experience and improved skill. Split planks form the seat and back, while carefully fitted joints create a structure that's both comfortable and durable. It's rough work by furniture-making standards, but it provides the basic comfort of sitting properly rather than constantly squatting or perching on makeshift surfaces. Shelving installation involves cutting shallow notches in the log walls where boards can be inserted to create storage surfaces at various heights. These shelves provide places for personal items, tools, and supplies that need to be kept organized and accessible. The careful organization of limited space becomes crucial when you'll be spending months confined to this small area. As evening approaches, and you light your first meal cooked entirely in your new fireplace, you realize how dramatically your situation has changed. Just days ago, you were sleeping on the ground in below freezing temperatures, constantly struggling to maintain basic warmth. Now you sit in a chair beside your own fireplace, in a cabin you built with your own hands, preparing food in comfort rather than desperation, the meal itself is still simple. Pieces of rabbit roasted over coals, drawn from your fireplace, but the circumstances transform even basic food into something approaching luxury. The warmth, the light, the sense of security and permanence all contribute to making this one of the most satisfying meals you've ever eaten. That night, as you bank the fire for steady heat through the darkness, you take inventory of what you've accomplished. The cabin is not only complete, but refined with improvements that make it genuinely livable. You have adequate shelter, reliable heat, proper food storage, and basic furniture that provides real comfort. Most importantly, you have time to hunt, to prepare for spring, to maintain your equipment, and to simply live rather than merely survive. The night passes in comfortable warmth, with the fireplace maintaining steady heat and the tightly chinked walls keeping out every breath of cold air. You sleep deeply and dreamlessly, your body finally able to relax completely after weeks of constant physical and mental stress. The cabin provides not just physical comfort, but psychological security that's equally important for long-term survival. Morning brings appreciation for details you've added to improve daily life in your wilderness home. The organized storage systems make it easy to find what you need quickly. The improved lighting allows you to work effectively even during short winter days. The comfortable furniture provides places to sit and work without constant physical strain. But perhaps most importantly, the cabin provides something that goes beyond mere survival: dignity. The ability to live as a human being rather than simply existing as an animal struggling against the elements. This transformation from desperation to comfort, from survival to actual living, represents the true measure of your success in building not just shelter, but a genuine home in the wilderness. As you prepare breakfast in your completed cabin, you realize you've achieved something remarkable. Starting with nothing but standing timber and driven by desperate necessity, you've created a space where human civilization can exist and even flourish in the midst of wilderness. The rough log walls and stone fireplace may be crude by urban standards, but they represent the triumph of human skill and determination over seemingly impossible odds. The cabin stands complete, refined, and ready to sustain life through whatever challenges the remaining winter months might bring. You've built more than shelter. You've built proof that with enough determination, skill, and willingness to work, human beings can create comfortable homes even in the most challenging environments. The mountain man's cabin is complete, and winter can come with all its fury. You're ready. The weeks that follow the cabin's completion settle into patterns that define winter life in the mountains. Rhythms dictated not by clocks or calendars, but by the sun's brief arc across the sky. The temperatures daily swing from bitter to merely cold, and the endless cycle of tasks necessary to sustain human life in isolation. Your days now revolve around the cabin that has become not just shelter, but the center of a carefully balanced existence. Each morning begins with the ritual of rekindling fire from the banked coals in your stone fireplace. This task, once fraught with anxiety about whether you could coax flame from dying embers, has become as natural as breathing. Your hands move automatically through the familiar motions, stirring the coals, adding tinder, blowing gently until flames catch, feeding small sticks until the fire builds to useful strength. The cabin fills with warmth and the comfortable smell of pine smoke drawn cleanly up your infesticate. My only lipstick, Ruby Kiss. Ruby Kiss, Ruby Kiss. Only Ruby Kiss. Chimney. The morning fire provides more than heat, it gives structure to your day and serves as the foundation for every other activity. From its coals, you cook breakfast, usually rabbit or other small game roasted on green sticks, seasoned with precious salt from your dwindling supply. The flames provide light for the detailed work of maintaining your equipment, sharpening your axe and knife, repairing tears in your buckskins, crafting replacement parts for tools that break under constant use, Your daily routine has evolved to make maximum use of the brief winter daylight. The sun rises late and sets early at this latitude and season, giving you perhaps 8 hours of useful light for outdoor work. These precious hours are devoted to hunting, gathering firewood, checking the trap lines you've established along game trails, and maintaining the external systems that keep your cabin habitable. The hunting has become a crucial skill that determines not just your diet, but your very survival through the remaining winter months. Your success rate with the rifle has improved dramatically through necessity and practice. Where once you might miss an easy shot due to cold-numbed fingers or inexperience, you now make clean kills on rabbits, ptarmigan, and occasional deer with the confidence of a man whose life depends on his marksmanship. The trap lines you've established require daily attention, but provide a more reliable food source than hunting alone. Simple snares made from braided sinew catch rabbits and other small game while you attend to other tasks. Deadfall traps, constructed from carefully balanced logs and stones, can take larger prey. These passive hunting methods work around the clock, multiplying your effectiveness beyond what one man with a rifle could achieve alone. Firewood gathering has become an ongoing obsession that governs much of your outdoor activity. A cabin this size and these temperatures consumes enormous quantities of fuel, easily a cord or more per month if you want to maintain comfortable temperatures. Every day that weather permits, you venture into the forest to cut, split, and haul the wood that keeps your fireplace burning and your shelter livable. The wood cutting has taught you subtle lessons about different species and their burning characteristics. Pine burns hot and fast, perfect for cooking fires but requiring constant feeding. Hardwoods like oak or maple, when you can find them, burn longer and hotter, but are harder to ignite and split. Each type of wood has its place in your carefully managed fuel system. With different species selected for different purposes and times of day, your afternoons, when outdoor work becomes impossible due to fading light or bitter cold, are devoted to the indoor tasks that keep your small civilization functioning. Food preparation and preservation occupy much of this time cleaning game. Cutting meat into strips for drying, rendering fat for cooking and lamp fuel, scraping hides for various uses around the cabin. The hide preparation has become particularly important as winter deepens and your original clothing shows increasing wear. Every animal skin, no matter how small, is carefully preserved and worked into useful material. Rabbit pelts become warm linings for gloves and caps. Deer hides provide material for clothing repairs and replacement parts. Even small scraps find uses as patches, ties, or wadding for various purposes. The long winter evenings provide time for the detailed handwork that maintains your equipment and improves your living conditions. By lamplight, you repair tears in clothing with careful stitching, using sinew thread and bone needles. You craft replacement parts for tools that break under constant use. You work on improving and refining the crude furniture and storage systems that make your cabin more livable. These evening work sessions have become almost meditative, providing rhythm and purpose to the dark hours that might otherwise drag endlessly. The familiar motions of mending, crafting, and improving serve as both practical necessity and psychological comfort. Each small project completed represents progress, improvement, and mastery over your environment. The nights themselves have taken on their own character and routine. Banking the fire to provide steady heat through the darkness has become an exact science to little fuel, and you wake to a cold cabin and the difficult task of rekindling flames. Too much and you waste precious wood while risking a dangerous overheating situation. You've learned to judge exactly how much wood to add for optimal overnight burning. Sleep in your completed cabin comes easily and deeply. A luxury you'd almost forgotten existed during the months of camping in the open wilderness. The constant background stress of exposure to the elements has been replaced by genuine security. Your sleep is no longer the light, alert rest of an animal constantly listening for danger. but the deep, restorative sleep of a human being in a safe, warm shelter. But winter life in the mountains demands constant vigilance about weather and conditions. Beyond your cabin walls, storm systems move through regularly, sometimes lasting for days and requiring you to remain inside except for essential tasks like gathering firewood from your nearby supply and checking that snow isn't accumulating dangerously on your roof. These storm-bound periods test both your physical preparations and your mental resilience. Having adequate food, fuel, and materials stockpiled makes the difference between riding out bad weather in relative comfort or facing genuine hardship. But equally important is maintaining mental activity and purpose during enforced confinement that can last for days at a time. You've developed routines and projects that keep your mind active during these isolated periods. Planning improvements to your cabin and storage systems. Working on detailed projects like carving bowls and utensils from wood. Even talking aloud to yourself or to imaginary companions a practice. That might seem odd in civilization, but serves an important psychological function in maintaining mental health during extreme isolation. The weather itself has become a subject of intense study and fascination. Without access to weather reports or forecasts, you've learned to read the subtle signs that indicate changing conditions, the behavior of birds and animals, the color and movement of clouds, changes in wind direction and pressure, the quality of light at different times of day. This knowledge helps you plan activities and prepare for storms before they arrive. Your relationship with the local wildlife has evolved from simple predator-prey dynamics to something more complex and nuanced. You've learned to recognize individual animals and their patterns, the family of ravens that visits your clearing each morning, the red squirrel that has established territory in the large pine near your door, the deer that follow established trails past your cabin on their way to winter feeding areas. This wildlife observation serves practical purposes. Understanding animal behavior helps you hunt and trap more effectively, but it also provides companionship of a sort during the long isolation. The daily appearance of familiar creatures creates a sense of community and continuity that helps combat the psychological challenges of solitary living. As winter deepens and the days grow shorter, you find yourself settling into rhythms that feel increasingly natural and sustainable. The frantic urgency of the building phase has been replaced by the steady, measured pace of maintenance and survival. Each day brings its predictable tasks and rewards, creating a life that's hard but satisfying in ways that your previous existence never provided. The cabin that once represented desperate necessity has become genuine home, a place where you not only survive but actually live with comfort and dignity. The routines you've established, the skills you've developed, and the systems you've created all contribute to a way of life that feels complete and self-sufficient. This is what the mountain men who succeeded understood. Survival isn't just about not dying. It's about creating a life worth living, even in the harshest circumstances. The evening ritual of banking your fire and settling in for the night has become one of quiet satisfaction rather than desperate hope. As you look around your completed cabin at the tight-fitted walls, the efficient fireplace, the organized storage systems, the comfortable furniture you've crafted, you see proof of what human determination and skill can accomplish when survival depends on getting every detail right. Tomorrow will bring another day of the same essential tasks: tending fire, hunting, or checking traps, gathering fuel, maintaining equipment, preparing food, working on improvements and repairs. But these tasks no longer feel like desperate struggles against impossible odds. As February gives way to March, subtle changes begin to appear in the rhythm of your mountain wilderness life. The sun, while still low on the horizon, rises a few minutes earlier each day and sets a few minutes later. gradually extending the precious hours of daylight that govern all outdoor activity. The brutal cold of deep winter begins to show signs of moderating. Though temperatures still drop well below freezing every night and require constant vigilance to maintain the fires that keep you alive, these small seasonal shifts might go unnoticed by someone living in civilization. But to a man whose life depends entirely on reading natural signs, they represent the first tentative promises that winter's grip on these mountains is not eternal. The changes bring both hope and new challenges, hope for the eventual return of easier living conditions, but challenges in the form of new problems that spring's approach will bring to mountain life. Your daily routines continue much as they have throughout the winter months, but with subtle modifications that reflect both your growing expertise and the changing season. The morning fire-building ritual remains the same, but you notice that the cabin retains heat longer through the night, requiring less fuel to maintain comfortable temperatures. Your food supplies, carefully managed through the long winter, remain adequate but show the effects of months of steady consumption. The hunting and trapping that provide most of your protein have taken a new urgency as you notice signs that game patterns are beginning to shift with the approaching season change. The rabbits that have been your most reliable food source are starting to show different behaviors, moving to new areas as their winter feeding patterns change. Your trap lines require constant adjustment to remain effective. The firewood consumption that has dominated so much of your outdoor work begins to show signs of moderating as the worst cold gradually lessens. Your carefully stockpiled supply, which seemed impossibly large when you first began cutting it in the fall, now shows the effects of months of steady burning. The mathematics of wilderness heating are unforgiving. Every day requires a substantial quantity of fuel, and those days accumulate into enormous consumption over a full winter. But the gradual warming also brings new opportunities. On the warmest days, when temperatures rise above freezing for a few hours in the afternoon, you can undertake maintenance projects that were impossible during the bitter cold of January and February. Repairs to your roof, improvements to your storage systems, and preparation for the spring hunting season that will soon arrive. The changing light and weather patterns also affect your psychological state in ways that go beyond simple seasonal adjustment. The long, dark months of winter have tested your mental resilience as much as your physical survival skills. The prospect of longer days and eventually warmer weather provides motivation and hope that help carry you through the remaining challenges of late winter. Your evening routines by lamplight continue much as they have, but with new purposes that reflect the approaching seasonal transition. Instead of just maintaining equipment through the winter, you begin preparing for spring activities, checking your rifle thoroughly for winter damage, repairing and improving your clothing for increased outdoor activity, planning, hunting, and trapping strategies for the changing season ahead. The night sounds outside. Your cabin walls begin to change as well, with animal activity patterns shifting in response to lengthening days and gradually moderating temperatures. The complete silence of deep winter gives way to occasional sounds of wildlife movement, subtle signs that the dormant forest is beginning to show the first stirrings of spring activity. These changes, small as they are, represent enormous psychological shifts for someone who has spent months in isolation with nothing but his own resources to depend upon. The knowledge that your carefully constructed shelter and survival systems have successfully carried you through the worst that mountain winter could deliver provides confidence that borders on triumph. The cabin itself shows the effects of months of continuous occupation and use. The log walls have settled and seasoned, creating even tighter joints than when first constructed. The fireplace and chimney have developed the patina of constant use, with stones blackened by smoke and heat stressed into even stronger configurations. Every system you've built has been tested by months of harsh conditions and proven its worth. Your personal Transformation through the winter months is perhaps even more dramatic. Then the seasonal changes beginning to appear around you. The man who began building this cabin in desperate haste last fall bears little resemblance to the skilled craftsman and experienced outdoorsman you've become. Every skill necessary for wilderness survival has been learned and refined through constant practice under conditions where mistakes could be fatal. The clothing you wear, patched and repatched with scraps of hide and sinew, tells the story of adaptation and resourcefulness. The tools you use, maintained and modified through months of hard service, have become extensions of your own hands. The routines you follow have evolved into an efficient lifestyle that maximizes survival while providing genuine comfort and security as you sit beside your fireplace on a March evening, listening to wind that no longer carries the bitter edge of deep winter. You can reflect on what you've accomplished, starting with nothing but standing timber and driven by desperate necessity. You've created not just shelter, but a complete lifestyle that enables human life to flourish even in one of the harshest environments on the continent. The cabin around you represents more than expert construction. It represents the triumph of human intelligence and determination over seemingly impossible odds. Every log you've cut and fitted, every stone you've placed in your fireplace, every small improvement and refinement you've made contributes to a shelter that has proven itself against everything mountain winter could deliver. But the approaching spring also brings awareness of the larger cycle of wilderness life. The cabin that has been your entire world through the winter months will soon need to accommodate the expanded activity that warmer weather brings. Hunting seasons will open up new opportunities and challenges. The isolation that has defined winter life will give way to possibilities of contact with other mountain men, trading opportunities, and the annual social gathering of rendezvous. Your success in building and surviving in this cabin has proven your worthiness to join the ranks of the true mountain men, those who not only survive their first winter but emerge stronger and more capable than before. The skills you've developed, the confidence you've gained, and the intimate knowledge of wilderness life you've acquired represent credentials that no formal education could provide. The items you'll trade at rendezvous furs trapped through the winter, items crafted during long evening hours, and the simple fact of your survival will establish your reputation among the community of men who've chosen this demanding lifestyle. Your cabin stands as proof of your capability and commitment to the mountain man's way of life. As the fire burns low and you prepare for sleep, you realize that the desperate race against winter that dominated your cabin construction has been replaced by something far more sustainable: mastery. You've not just survived the winter, you've learned to live comfortably and successfully in conditions that defeat most men who attempt them. The sounds of settling logs and crackling fire that have become the soundtrack of your winter nights now carry different meanings. Instead of desperate measures against deadly cold, they represent the comfortable routines of a life you've mastered. The cabin holds you in warmth and security that you've earned through your own skill and determination. Tomorrow will bring another day of the routines that have sustained you through the hardest months: tending fire, hunting or checking traps, maintaining equipment, preparing food, working on improvements and repairs. But these tasks no longer feel like desperate struggles for survival. They feel like the natural rhythms of a lifestyle you've chosen and conquered. The mountain man's cabin stands complete, proven and ready for whatever challenges the remaining winter and coming spring might bring. More importantly, it has proven that human beings can create comfortable, dignified lives even in the most challenging circumstances, given sufficient determination, skill, and willingness to work for what they need. As sleep approaches and the fire settles to coals that will burn through the night, you rest with the satisfaction of knowing you've accomplished something remarkable. The cabin around you represents more than shelter. It represents proof that the human spirit, when properly applied, can triumph over any obstacle nature can devise. As we return from that distant October morning in 1834, as you settle back into your comfortable bed with its soft mattress and controlled temperature, take a moment to appreciate the remarkable journey we've shared. We've witnessed the transformation of a desperate man, racing against winter into a skilled craftsman who mastered one of humanity's most fundamental challenges, creating shelter from the raw materials of the wilderness. The cabin that began as scattered timber in a remote clearing became something far more significant than simple shelter. It became proof of what human determination can accomplish when failure simply isn't an option. Every log that was felled, notched, and fitted into place. Every stone that was gathered, shaped, and mortared into the fireplace. Every small improvement and refinement that transformed crude necessity into genuine comfort, all of it represents the triumph of skill and will over seemingly impossible odds. The mountain man whose story we've followed learned lessons that go far beyond carpentry and masonry. He discovered capabilities within himself that he never knew existed. He developed intimate knowledge of materials, weather, and survival that no formal education could provide. Most importantly, he proved that human beings can not only survive but actually thrive in conditions that seem designed to defeat them. The cabin stands now in your imagination as it once stood in reality, solid walls rising from wilderness, smoke curling from a stone chimney, warm light glowing from a single window against the darkness. It represents something we've largely lost in our modern world, the deep satisfaction that comes from creating something essential with your own hands. From materials you've gathered, using skills you've developed through necessity and practice the rhythms of wilderness life that sustained our mountain man through the long winter months offer their own lessons for our hurried modern existence. The necessity of planning ahead, of maintaining equipment, of finding meaning in essential tasks, of creating comfort and security through careful work rather than simply purchasing them. These principles remain as relevant today as they were in 1834. But perhaps the most important lesson from our journey into the past is the recognition of human resilience and adaptability. When conditions demanded it, an ordinary man developed extraordinary capabilities. When survival required it, rough materials were transformed into precise construction. When comfort seemed impossible, careful work and thoughtful planning created genuine security and satisfaction as you drift toward sleep in your warm, comfortable bed. Let the gentle weight of your blankets remind you of that mountain man settling beside his fireplace after another successful day of wilderness living. Let the controlled temperature of your room remind you of the cabin that held warmth against sub-zero cold through the skill of its builder and the quality of its construction. And perhaps, as consciousness fades and dreams begin, you'll carry with you an appreciation for what human determination can accomplish. The challenges you face in your modern life, whatever they might be, are not so different in principle from the task of building shelter in the wilderness. They require the same fundamental qualities: careful planning, persistent effort, willingness to learn new skills, and the faith that patient work will eventually overcome any obstacle. The mountain man's cabin was built one log at a time, one stone at a time, one careful joint at a time. Your own challenges, whatever they may be, can be overcome through the same methodical approach, one day at a time, one task at a time, one small victory at a time, until what once seemed impossible becomes not just achievable, but accomplished. Rest well, knowing that the human spirit has always found ways to create warmth, shelter, and comfort, even in the most challenging circumstances. The cabin in the wilderness stands as proof that with enough determination and skill, there is no challenge that cannot be met, no problem that cannot be solved, no dream that cannot be built into reality. Sleep peacefully. surrounded by comforts that represent centuries of human progress and ingenuity. And remember that within you lie the same capabilities that enabled one man to transform a forest clearing into a home. The same resilience that carried him through the longest, coldest nights. The same satisfaction that comes from building something lasting and meaningful with your own hands. The mountain man's story ends here, but yours continues. Whatever wilderness you face, whatever cabin you need to build in your own life, the principles remain the same. Careful planning, persistent effort, willingness to learn, and faith that patient work will eventually triumph over any obstacle. These mountains may be metaphorical now, but they can still be conquered, one determined step at a time.